Hi everybody! Can you believe it's a week since we were last here watching a video together like this? It's a week since I told you about my calculator pencil case, and we thought about how things get spoilt and rusty and old, and about those treasures in heaven that Jesus tells us, and about those things that Jesus tells us to invest our lives in. Well, this week I'm going to do something different. We're still in my Bible. Here it is. But this week we're right at the beginning in the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. There you go. And I'm going to tell you about the magnificent midwives. So, cue the music. Well, if I tell you that the country that we're going to is in Africa, and if I tell you that in that country is the River Nile, and if I tell you that the king of that country was called a pharaoh, then you know that we were in the ancient land of Egypt. The Bible tells me that in the time when we are thinking about, there were two sorts of people: the Egyptians and the Hebrews. The Egyptians and the Hebrews. And the Egyptians had grown up in Egypt. That's obvious. But the Hebrews had come from a place called Canaan down and into Egypt a long, long time before. And there's a wonderful, wonderful story about that in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And perhaps one day we'll look at that one. But for now we're thinking about Egypt with the Egyptians and the Hebrews. And the Egyptians and the Hebrews got on just fine for a while. And then the Egyptians started to look at the Hebrews and they became prejudiced. You might have heard that word, prejudice. It's when one group of people look at another group of people and think of them in a bad or a mean or an unkind way. So Welsh people might be prejudiced to English people and say that English people are all pompous and arrogant. And English people might be prejudiced to Scottish people and say that they're all grumpy and mean. And Scottish people might be prejudiced to Irish people and say that they're all stupid. Prejudice is when one group of people don't like another group of people. And we all know that that's not right. And we know that when people do that, sometimes it doesn't matter too much. Maybe it just makes people feel a bit unhappy. But sometimes it's really serious and people are very unhappy. And sometimes it means one group of people hurting another group of people. And sometimes it leads to things that are even worse than that. So we know that prejudice is bad. And we know that prejudice is bad because the Bible tells me at the beginning of the Bible that God created human beings in his own image. In other words, whether you are from Canada or Russia, or whether you're from America or China, or whether you're from Argentina or Australia, you are made in the image of God. All human beings are made in the image of God. We're all made a little bit like God, and it means that we're very, very special. And that it's very, very wrong to dislike another group of people just because of where they're from. We are all made in the image of God. But nobody told Pharaoh. And Pharaoh decided that he didn't like the Hebrews anymore. And the Egyptian people decided they didn't like the Hebrews anymore. And they became suspicious of them. They said to themselves, if these Hebrew people are here, they could be spies. They could be sneaky. They could want to spoil things for us. They might even overpower us. They became suspicious. And then they became, well, savage. They became cruel. They started to push the Hebrews around. They started to make fun of them. They started to hurt them and boss them about and make them do all kinds of horrible things. All the jobs that the Egyptians didn't want to do, they said that the Hebrews had to do them. And you know, if you want to get someone to do something for you, then really if you can't persuade them, then you shout at them, do what I say, or you hurt them. If you don't do what I say, I'll hit you. And really that's what the Egyptians had to do. They wanted to make the Hebrews do the work for them, to put them in their place, to push them down. And so they were cruel. They shouted and they pushed them around and they hit them, and they made the Hebrews' lives a misery. But even that wasn't enough, because then Pharaoh said something very, very terrible. He said, we don't want Hebrews in this country anymore, and so when a baby boy is born, we're going to kill him. That is a shocking thing to hear. It was a shocking thing to do, and it should and would shock us, except that we've heard things like that in other countries since. When we look at history, there are often times when one group of people has wanted to do something terrible like that to another group. It's always awful, and it should always shock us. But sadly, we've heard it so many times that we kind of think, well, that's just what happens. But it was a terrible thing for Pharaoh to want to do. And if you had a Pharaoh who was very, very powerful, and if you lived in a country where people said, well, Hebrews don't matter, you might say, well, what does it matter to me? I'm not going to do anything about that. But the Bible tells us something wonderful, something incredible, something amazing. It tells us about the midwives. You might have heard of midwives from this. I expect some of you watch Call the Midwife with your mum or your dad at home, and you know what a midwife does. But if there's a boy sitting next to you, or a girl on your table, and she looks a bit confused, well, let me explain. Imagine a man and a woman are in their car, and they're racing as fast as they dare to the hospital. And the man looks very, very frightened. His face is absolutely white. And the woman is grimacing like this. And they get to the hospital, and the woman hobbles to the doors, the sliding doors. And the man runs to park the car, and he grabs the big bag out of the boot, and he runs to the hospital, and they get to the lift, and he says to her, what floor is it? She says, it's 5. And they push the button on the lift, and the lift doors open, and they go in, and he says, what floor is it? And she says, I said 5. And he presses 5, and they go up to the 5th floor, and it says maternity ward. And the lady has got a great big tummy, and her baby is on the way. And the bag that the man is carrying is full of all the things that the lady will need to have her baby. When they get there, they're very frightened. They've never had a baby, and they don't know what's going to happen. And then a woman comes out, usually a woman, sometimes a man, but normally a woman. And she comes out, and she's calm, and she smiles at the lady, and she says, now you must be Mrs. So-and-so. Come this way. And she leads her into a room, and the lady gets onto the bed, and the man sits there very, very nervous, and the midwife says, I'm going to help you now to have your baby. And all through the process of the woman giving birth, the midwife explains what's going to happen, and she says, now's the time to rest, and now's the time to breathe, and eventually the baby comes. And when the baby comes, the midwife delivers the baby, and she passes the baby to the woman, and she says, here is your son, or here is your daughter, or if they're very lucky, here are your twins, or your triplets, whatever. The midwife helps the baby to be delivered safely. And in the time of Pharaoh, when Pharaoh had said that terrible thing about the baby boys being killed, that cruel and awful thing, there were 2 midwives, just two midwives, 2 ladies. And you know what the Bible says? It says that they decided they were not going to do what Pharaoh had said. It was too cruel and too wicked and too evil. They said, we are not going to do it. And those magnificent midwives said, we just won't do what he says. And so they would go into the house where the woman was going to have the baby, and they'd help the baby to be delivered, and then they would hide the baby away, maybe take it out of the house, or tell the family to go quickly away. And by the time the soldiers came, the midwives would say, the baby's gone. The woman has had the baby's gone, we don't know where they're gone. And they would make sure that the babies were safe. They were magnificent midwives. Now, let's take a little break. Have you heard of Hamilton?
You ever heard of Hamilton the musical?
The coolest history lesson yet.
The story of the $10 founding father.
Throw in hip-hop and dance.
Hugely popular music.
The Hamilton craze is showing no signs of slowing down.
It's a cultural phenomenon.
The world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton.
You copied that from that play Hamilton.
Hello?
Oh, wow!
The most talked about show.
Let's start with Hamilton for 1,000.
Alexander Hamilton.
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 I really want to see Hamilton.
We could all use some good news right now.
Hamilton will be streaming on Disney+.
Hamilton is a story for all of us.
History never sounded so powerful.
This is the story of America then, told by America now.
We love Hamilton in our house. If you have Disney+, well, you can watch it on Disney+. You might have seen your big brother or sister watching it, or your mum or your dad. Or you might have the CD or the songs downloaded on your phone. We've been listening all through lockdown to the songs of Hamilton, and we love it. And there's one line in that show about that man, Alexander Hamilton. He asks the question, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? That is a really good question. If you're small, don't worry about it. If you don't understand that, that's fine. It's probably a little bit hard for you as a young person. But you older ones, you get that. You understand, don't you, that you need to stand for something. And you probably know what you stand for. Jesus says something wonderful in the Bible. The grown-ups were all saying, how do I get into heaven? And Jesus said, unless you become like a little child, you can't get into the kingdom of heaven. And one of the things he meant was that if we want to get into God's kingdom, we have to be like children in terms of their righteousness. That's a big word, but you understand what it means. Righteousness is standing up for what is right, doing the right thing. The magnificent midwives were righteous. They did the right thing at the right time. They stood up for something. And it's the same for you. You're young, but you understand what it is to stand up for what's right. So be encouraged. Think of those magnificent midwives when somebody is telling you to do something you know is wrong. When somebody is upsetting someone else in the playground. When you know that the joke has gone too far and that it's really hurting somebody. Stand up for what you know is right. Be like those magnificent midwives. Get into practice early on to stand up for what is right. Well, it's been another busy week, and I'm sure that you've worked really hard. And there's opportunity on a Friday to say that they've been magnificent students, magnificent pupils who've done really good work. And so I'm sure that if she hasn't done it already, or he, your teacher has got some superstar awards to give out. So look, congratulations to you who've done well. Well done to you all for working hard this week and for putting in a shift when it's been another really trying week. Well done for coming to school and smiling and playing your part and being magnificent in whatever you've done. And I will see you all next week.